I was adjusting my wheelchair's footrest in the corner of the banquet hall when I heard my husband's voice carrying across the room. Not loud exactly, but clear. That particular tone he used when he thought he was being clever, when he thought no one who mattered was listening. The Glasgow Science Centre venue buzzed with conversation all around me. The River Clyde stretched dark and glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind the stage, city lights reflecting off the water like scattered coins. My tea had gone cold in its cup, a skin forming on the surface. I'd been waiting 47 minutes for Marcus to bring me the promised plate from the buffet. 47 minutes of watching him move through the crowd, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, completely absorbed in conversation with his colleagues. I wasn't annoyed yet, just resigned. This was how these events always went. The wheelchair's footrest had been sticking lately, the left side refusing to adjust smoothly. I'd mentioned it to Marcus 3 times over the past week, asking if he could help me get it repaired. Each time he'd nodded and said he'd look into it, then immediately moved on to something else. So here I was, in the corner of a crowded event, trying to fix it myself while my dress caught on the mechanism and my fingers ached from the effort. The room around me pulsed with energy. Laughter erupted from a group near the buffet table. The clink of glasses, the rustle of expensive clothing, the rhythmic thump of background music. Everyone was having a wonderful time. Everyone was connected, engaged, part of something. And I was in the corner, fighting with a footrest, invisible except when people needed to step around me with that particular apologetic expression I'd come to know so well. Then I heard it, clear as a bell cutting through the ambient noise. Honestly, bringing Claire was just for optics. My hands stopped moving on the footrest. I looked up, trying to locate him in the crowd. He was standing maybe 20 feet away, near the bar, surrounded by 4 or 5 colleagues. His back was partially to me, but I could see his profile. See the casual way he held his whiskey glass, the relaxed set of his shoulders. The whiskey was Macallan, I noticed. The expensive kind he always ordered at these events. 18-year, neat. He'd roll the glass between his palms, warming it, taking small sips like he was in a commercial. It was part of his image, the successful executive who appreciated the finer things. The company loves the whole devoted husband image, he continued. Makes me look stable, you know? Responsible, family man. Someone laughed, a woman's voice I didn't immediately recognize, but the pitch was high and performative, the kind of laugh people make when they want to show they're engaged with what someone's saying, not because they find it genuinely funny. Marcus took a sip of his drink, warming to his audience now. I could see his free hand gesturing as he spoke, that expansive movement he made when he was holding court. But between us, it's exhausting pretending I care about every little accessibility issue she whines about. The laughter that followed made my chest tighten, multiple voices joining in. I recognized them now. David from accounting, that new manager Fiona, and someone else whose voice I couldn't quite place but knew I'd heard before. People I'd smiled at. People who'd shaken my hand at previous events and called me lovely. People who'd asked how I was doing and seemed genuinely interested when I answered. Or at least, that's what I'd thought. Now I understood those interactions differently. The quick glances at Marcus when I was speaking. The way conversations would wrap up just a bit too efficiently. The polite smiles that never quite reached their eyes. I mean, she can't even get herself a bloody plate of food, Marcus said, and the contempt in his voice was so casual, it felt worse than if he'd been shouting. What kind of wife is that? Deadweight, literally. Deadweight. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because I'd never considered that he might feel burdened sometimes. Every relationship has moments where one person needs more support than the other. I'd accepted that my disability meant I needed help with certain things. I'd tried to be gracious about it, tried not to ask for too much, tried to manage as much as I could independently, but dead weight. That wasn't about needing help. That was about having no value. about being something that dragged him down with no redeeming qualities to offset the burden. More laughter. Someone said something I couldn't make out, something that prompted Marcus to lean in closer to the group, his voice dropping to a more conspiratorial volume. I couldn't hear the words anymore, but I could see the reactions. A woman's hand flying to her mouth in shock that quickly dissolved into giggles. David shaking his head and grinning. Everyone having a wonderful time at my expense. The world didn't stop. That's what I remember most clearly about that moment. The world just kept going. The catering staff still circulated with their trays of champagne and canapés, weaving through the crowd with practiced efficiency. The music still played, something instrumental and forgettable. Probably jazz, but I couldn't be sure. Someone clinked a glass for a toast somewhere across the room. People kept talking, kept laughing, kept existing in their own bubbles of conversation. But I felt something inside me go very quiet and very cold. My hands were still on the footrest. I could feel the metal beneath my palms, cool and solid. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and controlled. I could see Marcus from this angle, see how comfortable he looked, how natural this was for him. This wasn't a slip. This wasn't frustration or a bad day. This was just who he was when I wasn't close enough to hear. The footrest suddenly clicked into place. My hands had been working on it this whole time without my conscious awareness, muscle memory taking over while my mind processed what I'd just heard. I looked down at it, this small mechanical victory that should have felt satisfying and instead felt completely meaningless. I'd been with Marcus for 6 years, married for 3. I'd met him just after my accident, after a drunk driver on Great Western Road had ended my career as a physiotherapist and put me in this chair at 23 years old. Marcus had seemed like a miracle then. Patient when I was still learning to navigate the world from a different height. Understanding when I had bad days. Loving in a way that felt like proof that good things could still happen even after the worst. He'd helped me through the darkest period of my life, those first 6 months after the accident when I couldn't imagine a future worth living. When every morning felt like a fresh reminder of everything I'd lost. My career, my independence, my sense of self. Marcus had been there through all of it, holding me when I cried, helping me with physical therapy exercises, encouraging me when I wanted to give up. Or at least, that's what I'd believed. That's the story I'd been telling myself for 6 years. But now, sitting in this corner listening to him mock me to his colleagues, I started to wonder, had he actually been patient and understanding? Or had he just been collecting ammunition, building a narrative of himself as the long-suffering saint, and me as the pathetic charity case who should be grateful for his tolerance? What I didn't know until much later, until this exact moment actually, was how others saw me through his words. How Marcus had been shaping the narrative around me for years, building a version of our relationship that made him the hero, and me the burden he carried with such admirable grace. I started thinking back to comments I'd dismissed, things people had said that had felt off at the time, but I'd explained away because I trusted Marcus, because I loved him, because I thought we were a team. Marcus's mother had cornered me at Christmas dinner last year. We'd been in the kitchen, ostensibly helping with the washing up, though really she'd engineered the moment to be alone with me. The rest of the family had been in the living room, their laughter and conversation filtering through the doorway. She'd been rinsing plates and handing them to me to load into the dishwasher, a task I could manage from my wheelchair if the dishes were passed to me at the right height. She'd looked at me with this expression I'd interpreted as concern, her lips pressed together in that way older women do when they're about to say something they think is for your own good. And she'd said, "You're so lucky Marcus stayed with you after your accident, Claire. Most men would have left. You know. You should be more grateful." The words had hung in the air between us, settling over me like ash. Lucky. Grateful. As if Marcus deserved a medal for not abandoning me when things got difficult. As if loving someone through hardship was exceptional rather than, what you signed up for when you committed to someone. I'd been so shocked I hadn't known how to respond. My hands had frozen on the dishwasher rack, a plate halfway to its slot. I'd mumbled something about how I was grateful, how Marcus was wonderful. She'd patted my hand with damp fingers and said, "Just remember that, dear. Don't take him for granted." The dismissal in her tone had been clear. The conversation was over. She'd said what she needed to say, and my feelings about it were irrelevant. I'd gone home and cried in the bathroom, and when Marcus found me, I'd told him what she'd said. He'd hugged me and called his mother old-fashioned and told me not to worry about it. But he'd never confronted her. Never told her she was wrong. Never defended me to his own mother. At the time, I'd thought he was trying to keep the peace, avoiding family drama, being diplomatic. Now I wondered if he'd agreed with her, if he'd sat in that living room with the rest of his family and complained about how difficult I was, how much work I required, how exhausting it was to maintain the devoted husband act. And his sister. God, his sister. Sarah had asked me once, in front of the whole family dinner table, "Do you ever feel guilty that Marcus has to do so much for you? He used to be so active before, always out hiking and cycling. Now he stays home so much more." It had been Easter Sunday. The table had been set with his mother's good china, the kind with the delicate floral pattern that had been in the family for generations. Roast lamb and roasted vegetables and Yorkshire puddings that Sarah had made herself, and kept mentioning she'd gotten up at 6 in the morning to prepare. Everyone had been eating and chatting and having a lovely time. Then Sarah had asked her question, and the conversation around the table had stuttered to a stop. All eyes on me, waiting for my answer. Waiting to see how I'd respond to this accusation dressed up as concern, as if my presence had caged him, as if I'd asked him to give up anything. Marcus had never been much of an outdoorsman. He'd gone hiking maybe twice in the year before we met, based on his own stories. He'd owned a bicycle that lived in the garage, mostly gathering dust. But his sister had created this narrative of sacrifice, and everyone at that table had nodded sympathetically. At Marcus, not at me. I'd stammered something about how we still did plenty of activities together, just different ones. Museums and galleries and restaurants. Things that were accessible. No one had pointed out that those were activities Marcus had always enjoyed anyway. No one had mentioned that he'd never been particularly outdoorsy to begin with. They'd all just accepted Sarah's version of events because it fit the narrative they wanted to believe. Marcus the saint. Claire the anchor dragging him down. I thought about his colleagues, the ones I'd met at events like this one. How conversations would dry up when I wheeled over to join a group. How people would suddenly remember they needed to refresh their drinks or take a call or speak to someone across the room. I'd thought it was awkwardness about the wheelchair. People not knowing what to say, not wanting to seem insensitive, afraid of putting their foot in it. Now I understood. They'd already been told I wasn't worth engaging with. Marcus had trained them to see me as his burden, his sacrifice, his cross to bear with such admirable patience. Why would they waste time talking to dead weight? But the comment that haunted me most, the one that came back now with sickening clarity, was from his best man's wedding speech 3 years ago. David, Marcus's university friend, standing up with his champagne glass raised and that huge grin on his face. The wedding reception had been at a hotel in Loch Lomond. Beautiful venue, expensive as hell, paid for mostly by Marcus's parents because they'd insisted on doing it properly. The room had been full of flowers and fairy lights and 200 guests who'd traveled from all over Scotland to celebrate with us. "Marcus is the most loyal bloke I know," David had said, and the whole room had quieted to listen. Seriously. Most loyal, most committed, most stand-up guy you'll ever meet. He could have had anyone at all. But he chose commitment. He chose to honor his promises. That's the mark of real character, that is. "To the groom?" Everyone had applauded, raised their glasses, cheered. I'd thought it was sweet. I'd squeezed Marcus's hand under the table and felt so lucky to have found someone that good people praised for choosing me. Now I heard the subtext. He could have had anyone, but he settled for you. And wasn't that noble? Wasn't that the mark of real character, tying himself to someone in a wheelchair when he could have had a real wife? A whole wife. The phrase made me feel sick now. A whole wife. As if I was broken. Incomplete. Less than. Marcus was a saint for tolerating me. That's what they all thought. What he'd made them think. I stayed at that party for another hour. I don't know why. Shock, maybe. Or some stubborn part of me that refused to leave and prove him right. Prove I needed him to function at events like this. I got my own plate of food eventually. Wheeled myself to the buffet and loaded up while people stepped around me with that careful politeness that had always felt considerate and now felt like pity. The buffet was an elaborate spread. Smoked salmon on little rounds of toast, chicken skewers with some kind of sauce, tiny quiches that looked delicious but were awkward to pick up with the tongs provided. I managed. Got myself a plate of food without spilling anything or causing a scene. A small victory that felt hollow. Marcus noticed I'd gotten food and came over, all concern and apology. His face was flushed from the whiskey and the heat of the room, his tie slightly loosened. He'd been laughing with his group right up until he'd spotted me with the plate. "I'm so sorry, love." I got caught up talking to David about the Henderson project and completely lost track of time. "You should have texted me." I just looked at him. At this face I'd kissed that morning. At these eyes I'd trusted. At this mouth that had called me dead weight an hour ago while I sat 20 feet away. "It's fine," I said. I managed. He kissed the top of my head, and I felt my skin crawl at the touch. That's my girl. So independent. Independent. As if I'd chosen this. As if needing help sometimes made me less than. As if he hadn't just spent the past hour telling people I couldn't even feed myself. His breath smelled like whiskey and the peppermints he always sucked after drinking so people wouldn't know how much he'd had. He was smiling at me like he was proud. Like I was a child who'd learned to tie her own shoes. I went home that night and didn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Marcus and listened to him breathing. Deep and even. Completely at peace. Not a care in the world. Why would he worry? He'd gotten everything he needed from that evening. Networked with colleagues. Maintained his devoted husband image. Had a few laughs at my expense with people who would never tell me what he'd said. The bedroom was dark except for the faint glow of the streetlight outside filtering through the curtains. I could see the outline of furniture in the dimness. The dresser we'd picked out together at IKEA 3 years ago. The chair in the corner where Marcus always threw his clothes instead of putting them in the hamper. The framed photo of us on the nightstand, taken on our honeymoon in Italy, both of us smiling at the camera like we couldn't believe our luck. I stared at the ceiling and replayed the evening in my head. Marcus's voice, the laughter, the casual cruelty of it all, and I started to wonder what else I'd missed. What other conversations had happened when I wasn't listening? What other jokes had been made at my expense? The decision to investigate didn't come immediately. It came 2 days later when I found the letter. Not a letter for me. A letter for my niece, Sophie. She was 19, bright as they come, starting at the University of Glasgow in September. She'd been saving for 3 years to afford her accommodation, working weekends at Tesco, doing private tutoring for younger students, babysitting, every possible job she could fit around her A-levels. Sophie had applied for a scholarship Marcus claimed to have connections to through his company. He'd promised to put in a good word, told her it was practically guaranteed, told our whole family he was taking care of it. The letter was a standard rejection. The scholarship committee had never received an application from Sophie at all. I found it in our recycling bin on Tuesday morning. Marcus must have gotten the mail before me, seen it, and thrown it away. Didn't want Sophie to know. Didn't want to have that awkward conversation. Easier to just let it disappear. The letter had been crumpled, then smoothed out again. like he'd balled it up in anger and then thought better of it. Like he'd realized he needed to hide the evidence but didn't want it to be obviously hidden. Just another piece of junk mail in the recycling, easily overlooked. But I'd been taking out the recycling when I saw it. Saw Sophie's name on the letterhead. Pulled it out and read it with growing horror. I took the letter out of the bin and smoothed it flat on the kitchen counter. Stared at it for a long time. Then I called Sophie. "Hey, Aunt Claire, I was just thinking about you. Have you heard anything about the scholarship? The university deadline for accommodation deposits is next week, and I'm starting to get nervous." Her voice was so bright, so hopeful. She trusted Marcus. She'd believed him when he said he'd handle it. Why wouldn't she? He was family. He'd promised. My heart sank. "Sophie, when did you last talk to Marcus about it?" "Last month. He said everything was sorted. Said I didn't need to worry." "Why? Is something wrong?" I looked at the letter. Looked at the date. It had been sent 3 weeks ago. Marcus had known for 3 weeks that Sophie's application was never submitted, and he'd said nothing. "Can you come over this afternoon?" I asked. "I need to show you something." Sophie arrived at 3, still in her Tesco uniform, smelling faintly of the bakery section, fresh bread and something sweet, like the cookies they made on site. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail and she looked tired. She'd probably worked a full shift before coming over. I showed her the letter. Watched her face go from confusion to disbelief to anger. It was like watching someone's faith crumble in real time. Her hands started shaking as she read, her eyes scanning the same lines over and over as if the words would change if she just kept looking. "He promised," she said, voice shaking. "He looked me in the eye and promised he'd submitted everything. I asked him twice, sent him all my documents. He said it was handled." "I know. I turned down Edinburgh because of this." Sophie's hands were trembling now, crumpling the letter. "I got accepted to Edinburgh. Full ride. But I turned it down because Marcus said the Glasgow scholarship would cover everything here, and I could stay close to family. I restructured my entire future around his promise." I'd known Sophie had chosen Glasgow over Edinburgh. I hadn't known why. Hadn't known Marcus had influenced that decision with a promise he'd never intended to keep. Edinburgh had been her dream school. She'd talked about it for years, ever since visiting the campus on a school trip when she was 15. She'd wanted to study there, to be part of that history and tradition, and Marcus had stolen that from her. Casually, thoughtlessly, because it was easier than actually helping her. "Why would he do this?" Sophie asked. "What did I do wrong?" "Nothing," I said. "You did nothing wrong." But I was starting to understand what Marcus had done. I'd overheard him on the phone that morning, talking to someone from work. I'd been in the bathroom getting ready and his voice had carried through the door. I hadn't been paying attention at first, just background noise while I brushed my teeth. Then I'd heard Sophie's name. "Yeah, I told the stupid girl I'd help. Keeps my wife's sister off my back. Obviously, I never submitted anything. Why would I waste political capital on some random kid? I need those connections for actual important things." I'd frozen with my toothbrush in my mouth, mint foam on my lips, trying to process what I was hearing. The bathroom mirror had reflected my own shocked expression back at me. My face pale, my eyes wide. Looking like I'd seen a ghost. "No, it's fine. She'll figure it out eventually. Probably blame the scholarship committee, not me. And even if she does figure it out, what's she going to do? I'll just say there must have been a miscommunication. These things happen." He'd laughed. Actually laughed. Then hung up and walked past the bathroom, calling out that he was leaving for work. "Have a good day. Love you." I'd spit out the toothpaste and stared at myself in the mirror. Tried to reconcile the man I thought I knew with the man I was hearing. That's when I knew I couldn't just leave quietly. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about the dead weight comment or the years of being positioned as a burden. This was about Marcus being willing to sabotage a 19-year-old girl's future because helping her would be mildly inconvenient for him. This was about protecting someone who'd trusted the wrong person because I'd vouched for him. Because I'd told my sister Marcus was reliable and kind. Because I'd made Sophie believe he cared. I started that afternoon. While Marcus was at work. While the house was quiet. While I still had the clarity that comes from shock before it gives way to the mess of actual emotions. I started in his home office. I'd never snooped before. Never gone through his things without permission. I'd trusted him completely. What a fool I'd been. What a naive, trusting fool. The office was on the ground floor, technically accessible for me, though Marcus had filled it with enough furniture that maneuvering my wheelchair took some effort. Bookshelves along one wall, stacked with industry journals and business books he'd probably never read, but looked impressive. A large desk against the window with a view of our small garden. Filing cabinets in the corner, expensive ones with locks that Marcus had never actually locked, because who needed security in your own home? Everything organized and labeled because Marcus was meticulous about his work. Or at least, that's what he wanted people to believe. Meticulous, organized, trustworthy. I started with the desk, pulled open the top drawer. Pens, paper clips, sticky notes in various colors. Nothing interesting. The second drawer had files, all labeled by project name. Henderson Development, Clydeside Renovation, Merchant City Proposal. I recognized the names from conversations we'd had. Marcus worked in corporate real estate development. These were his active projects. The third drawer stuck when I tried to open it. I pulled harder and it jerked forward. Contents shifting with a rustling sound. Golf magazines mostly. Marcus played occasionally, though not as much as he claimed to his colleagues. Beneath the magazines, I felt paper, thicker stock. I pulled out what turned out to be a printout of an email. The email was dated 14 months ago, addressed to his company's HR director, a woman named Janet whom I'd met once at a Christmas party. I read it 3 times before the meaning fully sank in. Regarding the disability access consultation fee. Yes, my wife's experience makes her the perfect cover for why I'm suddenly an expert on accessibility. I'll charge the standard £8,500 consulting rate for the report. She doesn't need to know I'm billing for her insights. She talks about this stuff constantly anyway. Easy money. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the paper. The print blurred as my eyes filled with tears I refused to let fall. Not yet. Not until I knew everything. I'd spent 9 weekends last year helping Marcus understand accessibility issues better. He'd told me his company wanted to be more inclusive, wanted to improve their buildings and developments to be more accessible. He'd asked me questions about wheelchair access, about visual impairments, about cognitive disabilities. He'd seemed genuinely interested for the first time in years. I'd been so happy, so stupidly happy that he was finally taking my world seriously, finally seeing value in my experience beyond just being the disabled wife who made him look good. Those weekends came back to me in vivid detail. Saturday mornings at the kitchen table, me with my notebook and him with his laptop, going through building codes and accessibility standards. Me explaining the difference between compliance and actual usability. Him taking notes, asking questions, seeming engaged. I'd made him coffee the way he liked it. Strong, with just a splash of milk. I'd ordered lunch when we worked through meal times. I'd been so pleased that we were finally working together on something meaningful. What a joke. He'd been billing for those hours, probably charging them as consultant time while I sat there unpaid, sharing years of expertise. I'd introduced him to my entire network. Occupational therapists I'd worked with before the accident. Disability advocates I'd met through support groups. People who'd spent decades in this field, who knew the legislation and the real-world challenges and the best practices. I'd shared resources, explained building codes, walked him through the difference between compliance and actual accessibility. I'd given him everything. My knowledge, my contacts, my expertise, my time. And he'd billed £8,500 for it. Never told me. Never shared a penny. Let me believe he was finally taking my world seriously, while he was just monetizing my knowledge like everything else about me. But that was just the surface. I could feel it. There was more. There had to be more. This level of exploitation didn't happen in isolation. This was systematic. This was planned. I kept searching, pulled out every drawer, every file. In the filing cabinet, I found a folder marked Personal Insurance. I almost skipped it, assuming it was just home insurance or car insurance. The kind of boring adult paperwork that everyone has and no one thinks about. But something made me open it. Maybe intuition, maybe just thoroughness. Maybe God or fate or whatever cosmic force looks out for people who are being systematically exploited. Inside was a policy I'd never seen before, an income protection insurance policy. In my name. I read through it twice, trying to understand. The policy had been taken out 4 years ago. It listed Marcus as the sole beneficiary. The policy paid out £3,200 monthly if I became unable to work due to permanent disability. I'd been in the wheelchair for 6 years. But Marcus had backdated the disability onset to 4 years ago, right after we'd gotten serious about the relationship. He'd been collecting £3,200 every month for 48 months. That's £153,600. I'd never seen a penny. I didn't even know the policy existed. The folder held monthly statements going back to when the policy had started paying out. I flipped through them with numb fingers. Every month, like clockwork. £3,200 deposited into an account I didn't recognize. An account number I'd never seen on any of our joint banking statements. Each statement was crisp and official. Each one documented another month of fraud, another month of Marcus profiting from my disability while calling me dead weight, while telling people I was his burden. I found more statements in the folder. Bank statements for this mystery account. An account in Marcus's name only, at a different bank from the one we used for our joint finances. The current balance was £187,000. £187,000. I had to read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. That many zeros. That much money. Hidden. Stolen. Mine. The insurance payments. The consulting fees. And other deposits I didn't immediately recognize, but all dated to align with moments when I could remember helping him or providing him with something. After I'd introduced him to the head of the Glasgow Disability Alliance. After I'd reviewed a proposal he was working on. After I'd spent a weekend explaining universal design principles. Each introduction, each conversation, each moment of my expertise had been converted into money. Money he'd hidden from me. Money he'd collected while calling me dead weight, while telling people I couldn't even feed myself. I wasn't his wife. I was his revenue stream. The realization settled over me like ice water. Every tender moment, every gesture of support, every time he'd said he loved me recontextualized itself in an instant. Had any of it been real? Or had I been a business investment from the start? A disabled wife to give him credibility, a source of expertise to mine, an insurance policy to cash in on. I sat there in his office chair, the bank statements spread across the desk like evidence at a crime scene. The afternoon light slanted through the window, dust motes dancing in the beam. Everything looked so normal, so ordinary. This was just a house, just an office, just paperwork. But my entire reality was crumbling around me. I thought about all the times I'd felt guilty for needing help, all the times I'd apologized for being inconvenient, all the times I'd thanked him for his patience, his understanding, his love. And the whole time, he'd been profiting. Every inconvenience I'd felt guilty about had been padding his bank account. The wheelchair I sat in, the disability I'd grieved for years, the accident that had destroyed my career and rebuilt my entire life, he'd turned it all into money. While I struggled with acceptance, with rebuilding my sense of self, with finding meaning in a body that no longer worked the way it used to, he'd been calculating how much I was worth to him. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful. 2 years ago, I'd been offered a consulting position with a disability rights organization in Edinburgh. Good pay, meaningful work, a chance to use my physiotherapy background and lived experience to help shape policy. I'd been excited. It would have meant taking the train to Edinburgh 3 days a week, but the organization had assured me they'd accommodate my needs. It was doable. Marcus had talked me out of it. He'd been so gentle about it, so concerned. "Are you sure you're ready for that kind of commitment? It sounds exhausting. What if it's too much? I just don't want to see you burn out and feel like you failed." He'd held my hands and looked into my eyes. "I know how hard you are on yourself. Maybe wait another year? There's no rush." I'd believed him. I'd thought he was protecting me from myself, from my tendency to overcommit, from the disappointment of not being able to handle it. So I'd turned down the position, told them I wasn't ready yet, asked them to consider me in the future. They'd hired someone else. The position never opened up again. Now I understood. If I'd been working, earning my own income, building my own professional reputation separate from him, I would have been harder to exploit. I would have had my own money, my own connections, my own sense of worth that wasn't filtered through his narrative. He'd isolated me professionally while making it seem like care. How many other opportunities had I missed because Marcus convinced me I wasn't ready? How many times had he shaped my choices while I thought I was making free decisions? My role in his life suddenly clicked into horrible focus. Marcus worked in corporate real estate development. I knew this, but I'd never really thought about how he'd become so successful so quickly. He'd only been in the industry for 7 years, but he'd risen fast, made partner at 32, won major contracts, built a reputation as someone who really understood accessibility, who could speak credibly to clients, who could win public sector contracts that required disability expertise. Several of his biggest client wins had come from companies prioritizing accessible design. It was a growing market, especially for public sector contracts. New legislation required higher accessibility standards. Companies that could demonstrate genuine expertise in this area had an advantage. Marcus had positioned himself as his firm's accessibility expert, the partner who really understood disability issues, the one who could speak credibly to clients about inclusive design. Every pitch, every proposal, every client presentation had featured the same narrative. My wife's experience has given me unique insight into these challenges. I've seen firsthand what good design can do and what bad design costs. I understand this isn't just about compliance. It's about people. He'd shown my photos, quoted things I'd said, used my story to build credibility he didn't earn. I'd legitimized him. I was the proof he cared, the evidence he understood, the reason clients trusted him with £2 million contracts. And I'd never asked for anything in return because I'd thought he loved me, because I'd thought we were building a life together, because I'd been grateful, just like his mother said I should be, that he'd stayed with someone in a wheelchair. I sat in his office surrounded by evidence of my own exploitation and felt something shift fundamentally inside me. Not quite anger yet, more like clarity. The kind of clear, cold understanding that comes before you decide what you're going to do about something. The room seemed different now, not just an office but a crime scene. Every file cabinet a repository of evidence, every drawer a revelation waiting to happen. I needed help. This was bigger than I could handle alone. This wasn't just about leaving Marcus or getting a divorce. This was fraud. This was theft. This was systematic exploitation that needed to be documented and reported properly. I needed someone who understood how Marcus operated from the inside. Someone who'd worked with him. Someone who knew the firm, the industry, the people involved. Someone who might have seen what I was seeing and recognized it for what it was. That's when I remembered Thomas. Thomas had worked with Marcus for 5 years before leaving the firm 8 months ago. I'd met him at several company events over the years. He'd always been kind to me. Actually kind, not performatively kind. He'd asked real questions about my work as a physiotherapist before the accident. He'd recommended books he thought I'd like. He'd once spent 20 minutes talking to me about accessible hiking trails in Scotland because he'd noticed I seemed interested when someone else mentioned them. At the time, I'd appreciated it but hadn't thought much of it. Just a nice colleague being polite. Now I wondered if there had been more to it. If Thomas had been trying to treat me like a person when everyone else was treating me like Marcus's prop. Marcus had badmouthed him after he left, called him disloyal and bitter, said Thomas had never been a team player, which I now understood probably meant Thomas had seen through him, had refused to participate in whatever games Marcus played, had maybe even challenged him and paid the price for it. I found Thomas on LinkedIn that evening. His profile photo showed him looking relaxed and genuine, none of the corporate polish that Marcus always had. He'd moved to a smaller firm that specialized in sustainable design. His recent posts were about ethical business practices and the importance of authentic expertise. I sent him a careful message trying not to sound desperate or crazy. "Hi, Thomas. This is Claire Donaldson. I hope you're well. I know this is unusual, but I wondered if I could talk to you about something important. Would you be willing to meet for coffee sometime this week?" I stared at the message for 5 minutes before sending it, second-guessing every word, wondering if I was making a mistake, wondering if he'd think I was insane, wondering if he'd tell Marcus. But I sent it. Because I needed help. Because I couldn't do this alone. Because sometimes you have to trust someone even when trust has been systematically destroyed. He responded within an hour. "Claire, I'm glad you reached out. I've actually been hoping you would. I have some time tomorrow afternoon if that works. There's a cafe in Finiston called Kelvin Coffee that's fully accessible. Say 3 o'clock? The fact that he'd specified a fully accessible venue told me everything I needed to know. He'd been thinking about me, considering my needs, prepared for this conversation even though I'd never reached out before. The relief that washed over me was almost overwhelming. Someone saw me. Someone cared enough to think about accessibility without me having to ask, to educate, to advocate for my own basic needs. After years of Marcus treating my access requirements as inconvenient demands, Thomas's simple gesture of choosing an accessible cafe felt like kindness I'd forgotten existed. I spent that evening preparing for the meeting. I made copies of everything I'd found. The email about billing for my expertise, the insurance documents, the bank statements. I organized them chronologically, created a timeline, wrote notes about what each document meant. If I was going to ask for help, I needed to make it easy for someone to understand what had been done to me. But more than that, I needed to be able to articulate it without falling apart. I practiced in the mirror, stating the facts calmly. Marcus has been collecting insurance payments in my name without my knowledge. He billed £8,500 for consulting work that was entirely my expertise. The words felt surreal even as I said them. This was my life. This was my husband. How had it come to this? I didn't sleep that night either. Lay awake running through scenarios. What if Thomas didn't believe me? What if he thought I was exaggerating? What if he listened politely and then did nothing? What if he told Marcus I'd reached out? Each possibility spiraled into worse possibilities until I had to turn on the light and focus on breathing, on the present moment, on the ceiling above me that was solid and real. We met the next day. I got there early, nervous and uncertain what I was going to say. How much I should reveal. Whether I was making a terrible mistake trusting someone I barely knew. The cafe was perfect. Wide doorways, plenty of space between tables, accessible bathroom, staff who didn't make a fuss about accommodating me. The kind of place that got accessibility right without making it a performance. I ordered tea and sat in the corner where I could see the door, where I could watch Thomas arrive and maybe get a sense of his mood before we started talking. Thomas arrived exactly at 3. He looked different than I remembered. Less polished, maybe, more relaxed. No expensive suit, just jeans and a casual shirt. His hair was longer, slightly disheveled in a way that suggested he'd stopped caring about maintaining a corporate image. He ordered tea and sat down across from me with an expression that was hard to read. serious but not unkind, concerned but not pitying. "I'm glad you reached out," he said, and he looked like he meant it. His hands were wrapped around his mug like he needed the warmth even though it was June. "I've felt guilty for months. I should have told you before I left the firm, but I didn't know how. Didn't know if you'd believe me. Didn't know if it would just make everything worse for you." My chest tightened. "Told me what?" Thomas took a breath, let it out slowly. "Why I left, what Marcus did, what I saw him doing to you." He'd been asked to participate in something he couldn't stomach. Marcus had pitched a major accessible housing development to Glasgow City Council, a £4.2 million contract to design and oversee construction of 50 new accessible flats in the East End. It was a huge opportunity for the firm, the kind of project that made reputations and established firms as leaders in their field. The pitch had featured extensive quotes and insights from me. Presented as Marcus's own expertise, his understanding of what accessible housing actually required, his vision for inclusive community design. "He showed photos of you," Thomas said quietly, "talked about learning from your experience, positioned himself as someone who genuinely understood disability not as a checkbox, but as a lived reality. The council loved it. They loved him. They awarded the contract the same week." Marcus received a £35,000 bonus when the contract was signed. "He bought that Tesla the same week," Thomas continued. "Told everyone at the office it was an early Christmas present to himself. You were in the passenger seat when he drove it to the office to show it off. I watched you smile and congratulate him. I watched you run your hand over the dashboard and say it was beautiful. And I knew. I knew you had no idea that car was bought with money he'd essentially stolen from you. I remembered that day, December 20th, last year. Marcus had been so excited. He'd woken me up early to show me the car, bright red with cream leather interior, parked in our driveway with a ridiculous bow on top like something from a commercial. He'd said he'd gotten a Christmas bonus, bigger than expected. We'd driven to his office so he could show his colleagues, and everyone had admired it, and I'd felt proud of him, proud that he was doing well, that his hard work was paying off. I'd taken a photo of him standing next to it and posted it on Facebook with the caption, "So proud of this man and everything he's accomplished." 300 people had liked it. Dozens had commented congratulating him. His mother had written, "You deserve it, son. All your hard work finally paying off." And the whole time, that car had been purchased with money stolen from me, with a bonus earned by exploiting my knowledge and experience. I confronted him, Thomas said. Privately. Told him what he was doing was wrong. That you deserved credit for your own expertise. That he should at least tell you he was using your knowledge, get your consent, compensate you fairly. What did he say? He laughed. Thomas's hands tightened around his mug. He actually laughed. Said, "She's my wife. Her value is my value. That's how marriage works. Besides, what's she going to do with it? She can barely manage her own life. I'm doing her a favor by putting her knowledge to good use." The cafe suddenly felt too small, too warm. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The other customers faded into background noise. It was just Thomas and me and the truth sitting between us like a living thing. That's when I started looking for another job, Thomas said. I couldn't work with him anymore, couldn't be complicit, but before I left, I made copies. He pulled a USB drive from his pocket, set it on the table between us like evidence in a trial. The plastic was silver and small, no bigger than my thumb. Such a tiny thing to hold so much weight. Everything I could document. Emails where he explicitly discusses using your expertise without credit. Internal memos where he positions himself as the accessibility expert. Client proposals featuring your story. Financial records showing the bonuses and consulting fees tied to projects where he leveraged your knowledge. I didn't know about the insurance fraud until you mentioned it in your message. That's new to me. But this covers 2 years of him exploiting you professionally. Why did you keep all this? Thomas met my eyes. His expression was steady, serious, completely sincere. Because I hoped someday you'd ask. Or that I'd find the courage to tell you. Marcus is brilliant at making people complicit in his cruelty. He makes you feel like you're the problem for noticing. Like you're being too sensitive or misunderstanding the situation. He creates this reality where everyone around him accepts his version of things, because questioning it feels harder than just going along. I let myself be part of that for too long. I'm done being complicit. I took the USB drive. It was small and silver and felt absurdly light for the weight of what it represented. Evidence, proof, validation that I wasn't crazy, wasn't imagining things, wasn't overreacting. "What are you going to do?" Thomas asked. "I don't know yet," I said. But I was lying. I already knew exactly what I was going to do. Thomas studied me for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Whatever you decide, I'll help however I can. You deserve better than what he's done to you. You deserve people in your corner who actually care about your well-being, not just what they can extract from you." The kindness in his voice nearly undid me. I blinked back tears, refusing to cry in this cafe, refusing to break down before I'd done what needed to be done. "Why?" I asked. "Why are you helping me? You barely know me." "Because it's the right thing to do," Thomas said simply. "And because I've watched Marcus operate for 5 years. I've seen how he uses people, how he takes credit for others' work, how he builds himself up by standing on people who trust him. You're not his first victim, Claire. But maybe, if we do this right, you can be his last." The cafe around us continued its normal rhythm. The espresso machine hissed, cups clinked, people chatted about their days, their plans, their ordinary lives. And I sat there with Thomas, planning how to dismantle my husband's carefully constructed life, how to expose him for what he really was. "There's something else you should know," Thomas said, pulling out his phone. "I didn't want to put this in an email, but Marcus has been positioning himself for a board position. There's a major opportunity coming up at the Scottish Accessible Housing Coalition. They're looking for a director of development. It's a huge role, lots of influence, access to millions in funding for accessible housing projects across Scotland." He showed me his phone screen, an internal memo about the position, listing Marcus as the recommended candidate. The memo highlighted his expertise in accessibility, his personal connection to disability issues through his wife, his track record of successful accessible design projects. "He's been campaigning for this for months," Thomas said. "Using your story, your experience, your community connections to position himself as the perfect candidate. If he gets this position, he'll have control over funding decisions for accessible housing across Scotland. He'll be the voice disabled people have to work with if they want housing support." The thought made me feel physically ill. Marcus, who called me dead weight in private, who'd been stealing from me for years, who saw my disability as nothing more than a revenue stream, would be in charge of accessible housing for the entire country. He'd be making decisions that affected thousands of people like me, while privately holding us all in contempt. "When does the board make their decision?" I asked. "End of summer, right after the firm's summer gala, actually. They want to announce the new director in September, have them start in October. So we have 3 weeks," I said. Thomas nodded. 3 weeks to make sure everyone knows who Marcus Donaldson really is. I went home and spent the next week building my case. I contacted the insurance company and filed a fraud report. The policy had been taken out without my knowledge or signature. I'd never authorized Marcus as the beneficiary. I'd never claimed to be unable to work. In fact, I'd been working part-time as a consultant for disability organizations right up until 2 years ago, when the workload became too much with my other commitments. The insurance investigator I spoke with was a woman named Helen, who'd been doing this work for 15 years. She sounded completely unsurprised by my story. "You'd be shocked how common this is," she said. "People taking out policies on their spouses or family members without consent, collecting benefits they're not entitled to. We prosecute when we can, but often it's hard to prove. The fact that you have documentation is crucial." I contacted a solicitor who specialized in financial abuse within marriages. Her name was Patricia Chen, and she'd been recommended by the Glasgow Disability Alliance. Patricia was fierce and thorough and completely unsurprised by my story. "You'd be shocked how common this is," she said during our first meeting, echoing Helen's words. "Or maybe you wouldn't. Disabled people are often exploited by their own families, by the people who claim to care for them. The law is finally starting to catch up to this reality, but it's slow going." Patricia's office was in a converted townhouse in the West End. Accessible entrance, wide corridors, proper desk height for wheelchair users. She'd clearly thought about these things. She was in her 40s, smartly dressed, with an intensity that suggested she took her work very personally. Her walls were covered with framed certificates and photos. I noticed several showed her at disability rights events, speaking at conferences, accepting awards for her advocacy work. This wasn't just a job for her. This was personal. "The challenge with cases like yours," she explained, spreading my documents across her desk, "is that exploitation often happens gradually. It's normalized. The victim is made to feel grateful for the exploitation. But what Marcus has done is unusually systematic. The insurance fraud alone is criminal. The intellectual property theft is actionable. The financial abuse is clear. We have an excellent case." She walked me through each document, explaining what it proved, how it would be used, what charges could be filed. Her thoroughness was comforting. This wasn't just anger or revenge. This was justice, systematic and documented. "I need you to understand something," Patricia said, looking at me directly. "When we move forward with this, Marcus will likely try to paint you as bitter, vindictive, mentally unstable. He'll say you're misunderstanding things, that you consented to financial arrangements you don't remember, that your disability affects your judgment. This is a standard defense strategy in cases involving disabled victims. We need to be prepared for it. How do we prepare? By being meticulous, by having documentation for everything, by having witnesses who can corroborate your version of events, by making sure your case is so airtight that his attempts to discredit you just make him look worse." She tapped the stack of documents. "Fortunately, he's made that easy for us. He documented his own fraud, left evidence everywhere. He was so confident you'd never find out that he didn't bother covering his tracks properly." Over the next few days, Patricia helped me prepare statements, organize evidence, identify key witnesses. We built a timeline showing every instance of exploitation, every payment he'd received, every time he'd used my expertise without credit, every lie he'd told. I also spent time preparing myself emotionally. I knew what was coming would be public. Humiliating for Marcus? Yes. But also exposing for me. My private life, my disability, my naive trust would all be on display. People would judge me for not seeing it sooner, for being too trusting, for staying with someone who treated me this way. But I thought about Sophie, about the 19-year-old girl whose future Marcus had casually sabotaged, about the disabled people across Scotland who would have to work with him if he got that director position, about all the future victims he'd exploit if someone didn't stop him now. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about making sure Marcus's cruelty had consequences, about sending a message that disabled people couldn't be exploited without repercussions, about using my privilege, my education, my resources to fight back in a way many victims couldn't. I gathered every document, every email, every piece of evidence. Thomas's USB drive provided the professional paper trail. My own investigation provided the financial fraud documentation. Patricia helped me understand what we had and what we needed. Then I made some calls. I contacted the compliance officer at Marcus's firm, requested a formal meeting to discuss concerns about professional ethics. Didn't give details over the phone, just said I had documentation that needed to be reviewed. I filed a whistleblower report with Glasgow City Council regarding the £4.2 million accessible housing contract. Attached evidence showing Marcus had misrepresented his expertise and used stolen intellectual property to win the contract. I sent a detailed complaint to the professional standards board that governed Marcus's industry certification, explained how he'd built his reputation through fraud and exploitation. Then I did something that felt petty, but also necessary. I notified Marcus's parents, his sister, and his best man that I had some important information to share with them. I told them the firm was hosting its summer gala in 3 weeks and requested they attend as my guests. They were all confused, but agreed. Marcus's mother actually sounded pleased, like maybe I was finally making an effort to be more social. Like maybe I was finally being the grateful daughter-in-law she'd always wanted. I also sent a personal letter to the CEO of Marcus's firm. Her name was Ellen MacArthur. I'd met her twice at company events. She was in her 50s, sharp as a knife, and had seemed genuinely interested in accessibility advocacy both times we'd talked. She'd asked thoughtful questions, listened to my answers, made notes on her phone about resources I'd mentioned. I told Ellen everything, attached all the documentation, explained what Marcus had done, how long it had been going on, how systematic it was. I told her about the insurance fraud, the stolen expertise, the bonuses earned from my knowledge, the Tesla bought with my money. Then I asked for one favor. The summer gala was scheduled for 3 weeks from that day. Marcus was set to receive an award for innovation in accessible design. I asked if I could speak before the award was presented. Just 5 minutes. That's all I needed. Ellen called me herself 2 days later. "I've spent the past 48 hours reviewing everything you sent," she said without preamble. No small talk, no pleasantries. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. "I've also conducted my own internal investigation, interviewed people, checked records. I need you to understand something, Claire. What Marcus has done is not just morally reprehensible, it's legally actionable. It's a violation of professional ethics. It's fraud in multiple forms. This firm's reputation is built on integrity, and he's compromised that in ways I'm still discovering." "I understand. I'll do you one better than 5 minutes at the gala," Ellen said. "I'll make sure everyone hears this. Everyone who needs to know what kind of man Marcus Donaldson really is. I'll make sure this matters." The final week before the gala was strange. I lived in the same house as Marcus, shared the same bed, sat across from him at dinner, and he had absolutely no idea what was about to happen. I'd become an actor in my own life, playing the role of supportive wife while building the case that would destroy him. He'd talk about his day, and I'd nod. He'd mention the gala, and I'd express appropriate enthusiasm. He'd kiss me goodnight, and I'd respond on autopilot while my mind ran through the presentation, the evidence, the moment when everything would change. Sometimes I caught him watching me with what looked like affection, or maybe it was assessment. I couldn't tell anymore. Every interaction was filtered through the knowledge of what he'd been doing, what he really thought of me. Was that smile genuine or calculated? Was that gesture of help real kindness or performance? I found myself studying him the way you'd study a stranger, noticing things I'd overlooked for years. How he positioned himself in conversations to always be the center, how he took credit for ideas others suggested, how he name-dropped connections and accomplishments constantly, how he needed everyone to know how successful, how important, how valued he was. The insecurity underneath his confidence had always been there. I'd thought it was endearing before. Something human and vulnerable beneath the polished exterior. Now I saw it as the engine of his exploitation. He needed constant validation, constant proof of his worth, and he'd turned me into a resource for generating that validation. On the morning of the gala, Marcus woke up excited, almost childlike in his enthusiasm. He'd laid out his suit the night before, checked and rechecked his acceptance speech, made sure his shoes were polished to perfection. "This is it," he said over breakfast, barely touching his food. "This is the moment that really establishes me in the industry. After tonight, I'll be known. Really known." "I'm sure you will be," I said, and meant it in ways he couldn't imagine. The summer gala was held at the Grand Central Hotel in Glasgow city centre. The ballroom was all Victorian grandeur and modern elegance combined. Crystal chandeliers, soaring ceilings, cream walls with gold trim. 200 guests in formal wear. Clients, executives, city officials, industry press. The kind of event where reputations were made and deals were cemented, and everyone pretended networking wasn't work. Marcus had been preening for weeks about his award. He'd bought a new suit, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, expensive fabric that draped perfectly. Practiced his acceptance speech in the mirror, modulating his voice for maximum impact. Told me at least 6 times that this was a major recognition, that people in the industry would be watching, that this would open doors for him. I'd smiled and said that was wonderful. Asked what he planned to say. Helped him pick a tie. "The blue one," I'd suggested. "It brings out your eyes." He had no idea what was coming. I arrived early, before Marcus. Ellen had arranged for me to wait in a private room off the main ballroom. Thomas was there too, for moral support. So was Patricia, my solicitor. And the firm's head of legal, a stern woman named Margaret, who'd apparently been horrified by what Ellen had discovered. "Are you ready?" Ellen asked. She was wearing a midnight blue dress and looked every inch the powerful CEO she was. "We've investigated based on your documentation. Marcus will be terminated effective tonight. We're cooperating fully with the authorities regarding the fraud charges. The firm is also pursuing civil action to recover the money he obtained through misrepresentation. But you deserve to say your piece first. You deserve to be heard." My hands were shaking slightly. I pressed them flat against my lap, felt the fabric of my dress. I'd chosen it carefully. Dark green, simple, elegant, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed, "Look at me." I wanted people focused on my words, not my appearance. "I'm ready," I said. Marcus arrived fashionably late, as he always did at these events. Swept in with his new suit and his confidence and his complete certainty that tonight was his night. I watched him on a monitor in the private room as he worked the crowd, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, accepting congratulations for an award he hadn't received yet. His parents were there, seated at the head table, looking proud. His sister sat with her husband 3 tables over, beaming. His best man stood at the bar, raising a glass in Marcus's direction. Watching him through the monitor was surreal. He looked so happy, so confident, so completely unaware. Part of me, a small part, felt something like pity. In a few minutes, his entire life would implode. His career, his reputation, his relationships, everything he'd built would come crashing down. But then I thought about what he'd done. Not just to me, but to Sophie, and to everyone else he'd used and exploited over the years. I thought about that phone call where he'd called my niece a stupid girl. About him laughing while describing how he was stealing from me. About years of being called dead weight while he literally made money from my disability. The pity evaporated. Ellen stood beside me, watching the same monitor. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "We have enough evidence to handle this internally. You could stay anonymous. Let the legal system handle him without you having to be public about it." I considered it for a moment. The easy way out. The safe way. Let Patricia file the charges. Let Ellen handle the employment issues. Let Marcus's professional organizations deal with the ethics violations. I could divorce him quietly, take my settlement, move on with my life without ever having to stand in front of 200 people and bear my trauma. But that would let Marcus control the narrative one last time. He'd spin it as a misunderstanding, a vindictive ex-wife, a woman scorned. He'd find a way to make himself the victim. And even if he faced legal consequences, even if he lost his job, he'd still have those connections, that charm, That ability to make people believe his version of reality. No, I said. I need to do this. People need to hear what he's done, not filtered through lawyers or press releases. From me, in my words. Thomas, standing near the door, gave me an encouraging nod. Patricia squeezed my shoulder. Margaret, the firm's head of legal, adjusted her glasses and said, "We're ready when you are." They all thought they knew the ending to this story. Ellen took the stage at 8 o'clock. The room quieted gradually, conversations trailing off, people settling into their seats. Marcus was at a table near the front, positioned perfectly to walk to the stage when his name was called. "Good evening, everyone," Ellen began. "Before we present tonight's awards, we have something important to address. Claire Donaldson has asked to speak, and I've invited her to do so. I encourage everyone to listen carefully to what she has to say." The room went fully silent now, confused silence, people looking around, trying to understand what was happening. This wasn't part of the program. This wasn't how these events worked. Marcus looked confused too. Then he spotted me as I wheeled toward the microphone at the side of the stage. His confusion shifted to something else. Concern, maybe, or the first whisper of alarm. A large screen was lowered behind the stage. Marcus noticed it. His eyes tracked its movement, then flicked to Ellen, then back to me. I reached the microphone, adjusted it down to my height, looked out at 200 faces all turned toward me. Found Marcus in the crowd, locked eyes with him. "3 months ago," I said, and my voice came out steady and clear through the speakers. "At the company party at the Science Center, Marcus told his colleagues I was dead weight he brought for optics. He said I couldn't even get my own plate of food. Asked what kind of wife was that?" The silence in the room changed quality, became shocked, uncomfortable. People's eyes swung to Marcus. I saw his face drain of color, saw him start to stand, then think better of it. "What Marcus didn't mention," I continued, "was that I've spent 6 years helping him build his career as an accessibility expert, an expertise he doesn't actually have. What he does have is access to me, my knowledge, my community, my story, and apparently, my earning capacity." The screen behind me lit up. Thomas had worked with Ellen's team to prepare a presentation. Professional, thorough, devastating. Email after email appeared, projected 10 feet tall for everyone to read. Marcus discussing billing £8,500 for consulting work that was entirely my expertise. Marcus setting up the fraudulent insurance policy. Marcus using my story, my photos, my quotes and client proposals. Marcus has made over £240,000 from exploiting my disability, I said, while telling people I was his burden, his sacrifice, the cross he bore with such admirable patience. The room was utterly silent except for my voice. People had stopped moving, stopped breathing, it seemed. Every eye was either on me or on the screen or on Marcus, who sat frozen at his table like a statue. I looked at his mother, found her in the crowd, her face slack with shock. "You told me I should be grateful Marcus stayed," I said directly to her. "You were right that I should feel something about Marcus's choices, but gratitude isn't it." I looked at his sister, Sarah. She was gripping her husband's arm, her champagne glass forgotten on the table. "You asked if I felt guilty that Marcus had to do so much for me," I said. "I do feel guilty now. Guilty that I didn't realize sooner he wasn't doing anything for me. He was doing everything to me." I looked at David, the best man from our wedding. He'd gone pale, his hand halfway to his mouth like he'd forgotten it was there. "You praised his loyalty in your wedding speech," I said. "Said he could have had anyone. You were wrong. He did have someone. He had a revenue stream who loved him too much to send an invoice." Then I turned back to Marcus. The room was so silent I could hear the heating system, the distant sound of traffic outside, my own breathing through the microphone. "I filed for divorce yesterday," I said, each word deliberate and clear. I've also filed fraud charges regarding the insurance policy. Glasgow City Council is investigating the accessible housing contract you won using my stolen expertise. Your professional certification board has opened an ethics investigation, and I've informed every disability advocacy organization in Scotland about what you've done, so they can warn others. Marcus opened his mouth. I watched the movement, watched him try to form words, but nothing came out. What could he possibly say? Every excuse, every justification, every manipulation had been stripped away. The evidence was projected behind me in his own words. The witnesses surrounded him. His career was ending in real time, and he could feel it happening. He just sat there, silent, his face blank, the posture of a man who'd been completely defeated and knew it. Ellen stepped forward beside me. She'd been standing in the wings, waiting for her cue. "Marcus Donaldson," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. The award for innovation in accessible design that was to be presented to you tonight will instead be donated in Claire's name to the Glasgow Disability Alliance." The room erupted, not in applause, in chaotic conversation, gasps, whispers, people turning to each other, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Some people were already pulling out their phones. This would be news in the industry by morning. 2 security guards appeared at Marcus's table. He stood slowly, mechanically, like his body was moving without his brain's full participation. He didn't look at me, didn't look at his parents or his sister or his best man, just stared straight ahead as he was escorted through the silent crowd toward the exit. I watched him go, watched him disappear through the ballroom doors, and I felt nothing except a profound sense of relief that this chapter was finally, completely over. The aftermath was messy in the way these things always are. Some relationships were salvaged. Thomas became a genuine friend. We met for coffee regularly, sometimes discussing work projects, sometimes just talking about books or films or life. He'd earned that friendship by choosing integrity over comfort, by keeping documentation when it would have been easier to just look away. Ellen offered me an actual consulting contract with her firm. A real contract, my name on it. My rate set by me. £12,000 per project. I accepted. Started working with their development team on genuinely accessible design. They listened to me, credited me, paid me. It felt strange at first, being valued openly, being compensated fairly, having my expertise treated as expertise rather than something to be mined and repackaged. The first time I received a payment with my name on the invoice, I sat in my office and stared at it for 10 minutes. This is what respect looks like, I thought. This is what fair treatment feels like. But Marcus's family? Done. Completely done. His mother called once, 3 days after the gala. Her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "How could you humiliate him like that, Claire? In front of everyone? Whatever problems you had could have been handled privately. You've destroyed his life over money." "He destroyed his own life," I said. "I just made sure people knew the truth. You're bitter and vindictive. I always knew you were never good enough for my son." I hung up and blocked her number. Felt lighter immediately. His sister sent a long email. I read the first paragraph. "While I understand you're hurt, I think you're being incredibly selfish." Marcus made one comment at a party. One moment of frustration. We all say things we don't mean. To destroy his entire career over, that shows a complete lack of forgiveness and grace. He gave you 6 years. 6 years of his life, caring for you, supporting you. And this is how you repay him. I deleted it without reading the rest. Blocked her email. Blocked her on every social media platform. Marcus's best man, David, surprisingly sent an apology. A real one. It arrived in the mail 2 weeks after the gala, handwritten on actual paper. "Claire, I've spent the past 2 weeks thinking about what you said, about the wedding speech. About everything. You were right. I never questioned the narrative Marcus sold us. I never thought to ask if you were okay, or if you felt valued, or if the relationship was what it appeared to be from the outside. I just accepted his version of things because questioning it would have been uncomfortable. I should have been uncomfortable. I should have asked. I should have seen. I'm sorry I participated in making you feel less than you are. You deserved better from all of us. I appreciated it. Genuinely appreciated it. But I didn't invite him back into my life. Some amends are just acknowledgments, not bridges to walk back across. The apology was enough. I didn't need more than that. The divorce was finalized 8 months later. Patricia was brilliant. Aggressive when needed, strategic always. She made sure I got what I deserved. I received £175,000 in the settlement, restitution for the fraud and exploitation. The court agreed Marcus had systematically profited from my expertise and disability status without consent or compensation. The insurance company paid out what they'd given Marcus plus interest. The firm clawed back the bonuses he'd received. Marcus was also convicted of insurance fraud, ordered to pay an additional £45,000 in fines and restitution to various parties. His professional certification was revoked. His reputation in the industry was ruined. Sophie got into university after all. Once the news broke about Marcus, the scholarship committee reached out. They'd seen the coverage, understood what had happened, and offered her the scholarship anyway as a one-time exception. But I'd also hired her as my part-time research assistant for my consulting work. Paid her £15 per hour. She worked 10 hours a week during term time and more during holidays. She was thriving, studying social work, planning to specialize in disability advocacy. She sent me photos from campus, from her flat, from nights out with friends. Every photo showed someone genuinely happy, genuinely building a life. As for Marcus, I heard updates occasionally, though I tried not to pay attention. Last I heard, he was working in a call center in Edinburgh, customer service for an insurance company, which felt like cosmic irony. No one in Glasgow's real estate industry would touch him. His expertise had evaporated the moment I took my knowledge back. I still use a wheelchair, still need accessibility considerations, still face daily challenges that able-bodied people never think about. That part of my life hasn't changed, but I'm no longer anyone's prop, anyone's cover story, anyone's revenue stream. I'm a consultant. My name on contracts, my rates set fairly, my expertise credited and valued. I'm an advocate, speaking at conferences, advising companies, training professionals on what real accessibility looks like. I'm a survivor who learned that the person making you feel small might just be standing on your shoulders, hoping you never look up and notice. But I looked up. I noticed. And I made sure everyone else noticed too. The knockout wasn't the moment I stood at that microphone in the Grand Central Hotel ballroom. The knockout was every day after, when I chose to value myself the way Marcus never had. When I demanded fair compensation. When I refused to accept narratives that diminished me. The knockout was building a life where my worth wasn't up for debate, where my expertise was mine to give or withhold, where the only person who got to define my value was me. Understanding the patterns of exploitation in relationships is crucial for everyone, but especially for vulnerable populations. Research from the National Domestic Violence Hotline shows that financial abuse occurs in 99% of domestic violence cases, and people with disabilities experience abuse at rates significantly higher than the general population. The World Health Organization reports that disabled women face violence at twice the rate of non-disabled women. What makes cases like mine particularly insidious is how exploitation can be wrapped in the language of care and devotion. When someone positions themselves as your caretaker or supporter, it becomes harder to recognize when they're actually profiting from you. The power imbalance inherent in many relationships involving disability creates opportunities for exploitation that can continue for years before being recognized. Education about financial autonomy. Understanding your legal rights regarding intellectual property and compensation, and having support networks outside your primary relationship are critical protective factors. If something feels wrong in how you're treated or valued, trust that instinct. Your expertise, your knowledge, your lived experience have worth beyond what they can provide to someone else's career or bank account. If you found this story resonating with you, or if it made you think about relationships and power dynamics in new ways, I'd love it if you hit that like button. Drop a comment below telling me what struck you most about this story, or share your own experience with recognizing exploitation in relationships. And please subscribe if you haven't already, because these stories matter and they need to be told. Also, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? Leave that in the comments too. And before you go, check out the video on screen next. It's about a woman who discovered her mother-in-law had been sabotaging her career for years, and the way she exposed it will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when the truth finally comes out.